Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Sound podcast, and we have another special episode, but I will call it a special pro episode because our guest here is Simon Hayes. Thank you for coming to our podcast. It's wonderful to have you here in Slovakia and at our podcast, and we want to aim this one for the pro sound community in the world. And Simon, as you all know, his career, if I will go through the movies, the list will be huge, the list will be long, but we want to focus on his career in musicals. Simon is very well known. I can say this, I think you are the number one guy for musicals. If I will be doing a musical, you will be number one choice. And this is the same with all the great directors that are approaching you. And I think we want to cover this whole career by telling the people how you went through the career about your musicals, and we will focus on your last one piece about Wicked that will be coming out now in the cinemas. So thank you for coming here, Simon.
Welcome, Simon.
Viktor, Miro, it's a real honor. You know, I've spent a couple of days with you guys, and your passion and your professionalism and what you've built here in Slovakia is just breathtaking. You know, I went around the studio this morning at the film school and I saw the Dolby Atmos rig, which rivals anything that we've got in London. It is truly world class. Not only that, but I can see that you're passing on all of the same messages to the sound students, which is we're all here for one thing, and that is to support that magical performance. You know, we throw all of the equipment away, we forget all about the technical talk, and everything boils down on a film set to one thing, and that's supporting those emotional and original performances. And that's what I'm passionate about, and I recognize that same passion in you guys. So thank you. It's an absolute honor.
Thank you, Simon.
Let's jump right into the Wicked. What was the best thing about the Wicked for you?
The best thing about Wicked for me was hearing Ariana and Cynthia singing together for the first time, because their voices just work. It becomes one nuanced voice. It's almost like they were born to sing together. That, you know, doesn't always happen with vocalists. Sometimes you can have two absolutely beautiful voices, but it doesn't necessarily gel in the same way that Cynthia and Ari's vocals did. It starts with producer Mark Platt, who's the mastermind behind Wicked. It starts with director John Chu, who is the visual genius, the capturer of emotions. And it starts with them saying, our version of Wicked in the cinema is going to be live sung. Obviously, when actors are singing live on set, we don't have the same kind of separation that we would get in a vocal booth, where we would do one vocal and then the next vocal, and then, you know, we would use overdubbing to put those vocals together and have that ability to have separation in the mix. When we've got two artists singing live on a set, those vocals have to exist together within the same space at the same time. We're not going to be saying to Cynthia, could you mime while we're on Ari's close-up, or vice versa. We have to capture it together. And so there has to be a beauty and an honesty in those vocals that works together. And we had that in abundance. When you listen to those two actors sing, it's almost like they were born to sing together. Something very, very special happens.
Yeah, I will just jump right in. And you are famous for your approach. Like, I want to capture it live. And I think they get in contact with you because you can deliver this live sound. And I think it was a crucial thing also for Wicked. If you look on the performances, I think you capture them live.
Of course, you know, when John Chu approached me, the conversation immediately went to live recording.
Okay.
Now, at that moment, John knew the set designs were going to be huge. This is the biggest musical that's ever been made. Okay. Some of our sets that were designed by production designer Nathan Crowley were as big as 2 football fields. They were absolutely huge. Everything about this movie was huge. And in that first meeting that I had with John, he expressed this to me. He said, look, Simon, the sets are going to be very, very big. We're shooting on multiple cameras. We're going to have big, wide crane shots, swinging in, huge amounts of choreography. The dancing is going to be just as big as the set design. There's going to be a huge amount of footfall. But my instinct is we've got to go live. Is it possible on a huge movie like this? And emphatically, my answer was yes straight away. I've done enough live recordings to know exactly what's required. I'm completely confident that I can get live vocals on a movie set. And that confidence was just brimming over when I found out that Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo were going to be playing the two lead parts. Because one thing that I knew that I didn't need to worry about was their vocal performance. I knew that was going to be on point. What I needed to worry about was how I was going to technically support those vocal performances and deliver those beautiful live sung vocals into the cinema. And, you know, that's what my job is.
And did you have the safety net of pre-records?
We have to have pre-records for a number of reasons. Of course, I've done musicals which don't have pre-records, which have been a completely different protocol and a completely different workflow. With Wicked, it was very, very important to have pre-records. Remember, I've just said how big this movie was going to be. Well, with scale also comes different shooting units. We have a second unit. We have a VFX unit. So immediately from the get-go, we knew that we were going to go in and shoot the performances, but we also knew that a second unit would come in and shoot big crowd scenes that didn't involve our singing actors. VFX units picking up VFX elements. Now, the lifeblood of Wicked is this rhythm that drives this emotional story. If we don't have the rhythm, we don't have the story. If we don't have the rhythm, we don't have Wicked. Mm-hmm. And so to send in the second unit team or the VFX team to move their cameras without the music would have been restricting them in a way that would have negatively affected the whole show. And so when those separate units go in, they need to have pre-records to be able to time their moves to time the camera cranes. We can't send Cynthia and Ari off to do second unit live vocals to time their crane moves. So it makes sense that we pre-record, if anything, to be able to give those second units tracks to be able to play back, to time their moves and to time their camera crane swings. But also we've got other elements. We've got elements like choreography rehearsals for 6 months before we ever start shooting. Mm-hmm. So the choreography rehearsals are a huge part of Wicked. You know, these are all different components that make Wicked different from most other musicals. The choreography is big, it is bold, it is highly creative. Chris, John Chu's choreographer, needed tracks to work with. And we hadn't yet started shooting. We hadn't started recording the live vocals. So again, another reason why we had to have pre-records. Finally, and this is really important, guys, this is a very, very big movie. We need to make sure that we can support the schedule. And if the unthinkable had happened and one of our leading actors had got a sore throat or a cold, or for whatever reason couldn't have sung live on the day, we needed to have something in our back pocket, an insurance policy, if you like, mm-hmm. to know that we can say, no problem, we can go to the pre-record. Now, the way that it worked out was, the moment we all got on the set, it became very, very clear that firstly, John Chu wanted to go with the live process because you put on your headphones on the set, you're watching your monitors, you hear these two actresses sing, and it just springs to life. But the other thing is, when you get onto the set and you start to hear the live singing and you understand the power of these vocalists that we're talking about who carried this movie, what was evident from the get-go was they had vocal stamina. They are world-class recording artists. They know how to keep vocal continuity. That's their skill set. They know how to be able to sing for 8 hours a day. That's their skill set. They know how hard they can push their vocals, but still keep the freshness and the crispness in their voice without wearing themselves out. And that's a skill set in themselves. So actually, that back pocket of safety of having the pre-records stood by really just became a safety net. We were recording live vocals on the set. That's what we were there to do. But if we talk about the pre-records for a second, we also used a really interesting technique on the pre-records, which again was about experience. It was about what I've learned over my course in musicals and live acquisition on the sets. You know what, me and Andy Nelson, the re-recording mixer, who are great friends, something that we've always spoken about when we talk about old school musicals is that brick wall between the live dialogue recorded on the set and suddenly you're into the singing and it's the pre-record and the different microphone technique. You go from a boom mic or a lav mic, which is picking up the dialogue, and then suddenly it's like, whoa, it's a Neumann U87 right there. And it's kind of like, thing, okay, we're into the lip sync now. And that's what musicals used to look like. You know, luckily we're moving away from that now and we're doing more and more live sung musicals. However, what I decided to do as part of my musical journey was the moment we start talking about pre-records, I collaborate with the music department and the music producer and Arthur or myself. Arthur is my first assistant sound, also boom operator. We will go into the music recording studio and right next to the Neumann U87 or whatever studio condenser mic they're using, we'll have an overhead Sherps boom, we'll have a DPA lav, and we'll record those stems on all of those pre-records.
Okay.
So that not only are we recording a safety net in our back pocket in case someone loses their voice or for the second unit to time their crane moves to, we've also got another, if you like, library of recordings that will completely match the on-set recordings acoustically because we're using the same mic. That's a little trick that I've got up my sleeve and it works extremely well.
You mentioned that this is a huge thing. It's the biggest musical. I think you are heavily into pre-production. You need to be. But if you are like remembering Vic, the first day that they told you that this is the project, I will come here. You have obviously all the experiences from the previous project. Was there something like, okay, this is another step? And was there some phase or some new step that you need to introduce to the workflow for this one?
I think the big difference on Wicked was that we weren't just going to use one particular workflow. I think that when I came together with the sound and music teams, guided by John Chu and his vision, it was clear that rather than having the same workflow as a previous movie, what I had to do was to cherry pick pieces of previous musical workflows and piece them together, not just to enhance Wicked, the movie, but I had to piece them together like a checkerboard, okay? Like a Pro Tools session where you're comping vocals together. That was what my workflow was like. And it wasn't based on what was best for Wicked as a whole. We broke it down into every single number. We broke it down into every single set. And we chose the most appropriate workflow for the song and the scene and the set that we were working on. And so rather than having a set list of ingredients, we had every single ingredient in the cupboard and we were ready to mix the correct ingredients for the filmmaking process for that specific scene. So if you like, we kind of had the rule book and then we threw away the rule book and we worked on experience and instinct to be able to primarily what I've got to do, what my primary role is to support those original performances and to make sure that those live sung vocals are recorded well enough to be of high enough quality to be able to mesh with the music, mesh with the sound effects and become one as part of the rhythmic DNA of Wicked and make its way into the cinema for the audience. So the answer is we basically devised a specific recipe for every single challenge. Rather than having one overall overriding workflow, it was choosing specific, unique elements for everything on the set.
Okay, so almost surgical breakdown of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And we used every single trick that I've experienced over 10 plus musicals, from musicals where we didn't do any live vocals to musicals where we were 100% live vocals with no backing tracks. I stole experiences and professional techniques from every single one of those different shows to build the workflow for Wicked. And we did what was best on Wicked for every single challenge that we were faced with. The one driving force through every decision was solo vocals contain emotion. There is an emotion and a fragility and an honesty in a solo vocal that is best presented live. And that's what we did. And everything else was built to support that thought process.
Beautiful.
As you mentioned, the sung vocals, to make it work, they must be captured like clear without any interruption. And what was the thing that allowed it? Was there some special collaboration in the filmmaker team, or?
Look, before we go any further, let's just make something very clear. It doesn't matter how good my sound mixing is. It doesn't matter how good this team around me are. If we are obstructed by other filmmakers, other departments on the set, we're going to fail. To be able to deliver live vocals isn't just the job of the production sound mixer and the sound and music team. It's the job of the whole film crew. Mm-hmm. From the producers and the director, through DP, gaffer, crane operators, grips, everyone, special effects team, okay? And we'll do a deep dive into special effects later. But all of those people, all of those incredibly talented artisans have to be supportive of the live process, because one department not being supportive can be enough to ruin those live vocals. Everyone has to be on the same page. Firstly, I'm incredibly lucky that I work with the best UK crews. I'm incredibly blessed that John Chu bought Alice Brooks, his fantastic DP, who has done a number of movies with him. And all of these HODs, whether it was Alice or Paul Tazewell, the costume designer, Nathan Crowley, the production designer, all of these different artisans, these different heads of departments, led from the front and were supportive of the live process and made it clear to everyone around them in their team that this is the way we're going to do it, because this is John Chu's vision. Mm-hmm. We're all here to deliver John Chu's vision. And John Chu's vision for Wicked was live vocals, because not just as a kind of buzzword to be able to say, well, we recorded it live. That's not what we're all trying to do, okay? It doesn't matter whether we record in live or in pre-record or in ADR. Those are just processes. What matters is what's best for the cinema audience. And there is something within that live vocal where there is the correct breath at the right moment for the movement of the actor on the set and the facial expression that matches. And the reason why it matches is because it's real. Mm-hmm. It's not from a pre-record. It's not from a re-record. The breathing pattern matches because that is the true breathing that the artist was using as he or she moved around the set singing the song. And that honesty and that realness basically has the audience believing the story. And above all else, what we're all doing is being storytellers.
You just told that you are going for like every breath, every movement of the actor, every performance. You need to capture it. And It's 2.5 football pitches. It's a huge set. I could not imagine the scale. If I will come there, it must be a huge stage. Electric generators, I think wind blowing and such a stuff. Can you give us just some examples, like how the crew helped you to maybe with these things?
Okay, just a few examples.
Okay.
So the first thing is that the big interiors were shot on huge brand new sound stages at Sky Studios Elstree.
Okay.
Fantastic facility. But when we went onto the exteriors, another thing that I want to make really clear is VFX on Wicked were there to support the primary production design of Nathan Crowley. This wasn't a blue screen movie. Okay. We were using real sets. They were built real size. Mm-hmm. There was no models.
Wow.
These vast sets with 40-foot walls. Shiz University had a river, a boating lake and a river and waterfalls. Okay. And this was all a real build.
Okay.
Because again, there is a truth in the breaths. There is a truth in the rhythm of the live singing, but there's also a truth in a real set. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that VFX shouldn't be used. Of course it should be used. But if we can use VFX to support real sets and to add another layer and dimension, then we're using VFX in the right way. I think that's my instinct. With that in mind, when we went onto the exteriors, we weren't doing interior for exterior. We went out onto a farm to the west of London, like 25 miles outside London.
Okay.
To a bunch of fields with nothing in them, and Nathan Crowley had been building the set there for over 6 months, I think probably up to a year.
Okay.
These were the biggest sets I've ever seen in 30 years of filmmaking. I like to think I've done a few big movies. I'd never seen anything like this.
Okay.
It was literally jaw-dropping. And when I first turned up to these sets, I looked at them and I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do about radio range here. We could be in trouble. Because one of the things about musical filmmaking, guys, is that rather than just having the shark's fins and receivers attached to my cart, and when I think to myself, oh, I need better range, being able to just unplug my cart, move it 25 meters closer and get better range, plug it back in. Okay, no problem. We're ready to go. The whole thing takes 2.5 minutes. Yeah. When you're multi-tracking live vocals and you're also supplying Pro Tools into IEMs with separate mixes, that means that I'm tied to a Pro Tools rig. When that Pro Tools rig is also supplying a live keyboard, should we want to go off-piste and support a live emotional performance with a live keyboard rather than a pre-recorded backing track, we need to have the keyboard plugged in the whole time, okay? When we are supplying, for instance, for a huge choreography moment, 40 kilowatts of sound reinforcement, I need to be tied to that. When we are being asked to have a voice of God system for our first AD primarily, and John Chu, should he need to talk through the voice of God, and I should just say that John's MO is he will always try and walk to the actors and have a personal interaction and conversation with them.
Okay.
But sometimes in between takes, there isn't time. He's back at the monitors and he needs to have a voice of God to be able to say, hey guys, that was fantastic. Let's go again. And woo, let's G this up and let's get this energy going. We're nailing it. Okay. And that's how John used the voice of God in a really, positive, like, this is party time. I love this. Let's go again. And that again breathed life into the whole movie set. But let's remember that everything that I've just talked about means that I just can't unplug a couple of cables from my car and move forward 25 meters. So from the get-go on those exterior scenes, I went very early on, probably 4 months before we started shooting, and had a look at the builds. And as I said, I kind of went, okay, this is going to be different. At that point, we hadn't gone Dante on our receivers.
Okay.
We did go Dante halfway through the show. At the time we were starting the show, that technology wasn't quite ready. The technology that I wanted to move on to, I knew it was coming, but it just wasn't quite ready at that point. So we started the show without Dante, And so what we did was we had Henry Smith, who's like a rock star cable maker based in the UK, who's been making my cables for 20 years. We asked him to make us some AES cable drums.
Okay.
And we had him make 2 12-way AES 50-meter cable drums. And what that meant was, it meant from the get-go, I didn't try and run my receivers from the sound cart, which is what I would normally do on most movies. What we did was we offboarded those receivers, and we knew that as long as my sound truck and my music truck were close enough, as long as I chose the correct place on every set to park them on the first day, that kind of had 50 meters of coverage to the left and 50 meters of coverage to the right, and I had 100 meters of cable drums, I knew that wherever those cameras went, I could quickly, via Robin, my fantastic first AS, who's responsible for the whole RF real estate on the film unit, he could quickly get my receivers closer to the action. And when the cranes moved 50 meters, so would my receivers. And so what we did on those huge sets, and what I'd really like to be doing, and what I try and do in studios, is I sit next to John Chu, the director. Okay. I'm there so that I can have that shorthand. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, guys, much as that's what I'd like to do, when I'm on a huge musical and we're working on sets that are as big as 2 football pitches with rivers and waterfalls, okay, and boating lakes, I need to position myself and my music team, because on these big musicals, the sound and the music team is all one big team, and we all collaborate and work together. I need to position my 2 trucks. One is the production sound truck, and one is the Pro Tools and live keyboard truck. I park them next door to each other, and I make sure that they're parked in the correct position so that wherever John Chu and his actors and Alice Brooks, the DP, want to take those techno cranes, I can get my receivers close enough. Mm-hmm. So the quick answer is, with that, is offboard receivers with 100 meters of AES.
Okay.
So that's how we dealt with the big sets. You asked about other challenges. Okay, let's keep on with the big sets.
Yeah.
David Smith, Alice Brooks' gaffer. Now, David is one of the best in the world. There's no doubt about that. David took the art of cinema chief lighting technician, in other words, the gaffer, to a whole new level. I've been working with David since I was, I think, 26, 27 years old. And our careers have kind of flourished in tandem. I've got an enormous amount of respect for him. And what I love about David is, it's not just for him about lighting. It's not just about the work that his team are going to have to do. He is very, very open-minded. And rather than being a gaffer, he's a filmmaker. He's looking at the bigger picture. And it sounds crazy, but this isn't always the case. The best gaffers this does apply to.
Okay.
But it doesn't apply to every gaffer. David is a true filmmaker. And he understands that sound is part of the cinematic experience. He's aware of this. And he, ever since we were 26, 27, doing much lower budget work, he's been the same. If I needed something, he'd make it work for me. And if he couldn't make my exact request work, he'd give me a very, very good compromise. The point being was, he was always on my side. He was always open to listening and trying to help and trying to find a way of working out a solution for the issue together as a team. So, we're on Wicked. We've got a few years behind us, and we know that it's the biggest musical ever made. And David is going to need to be able to light the biggest musical ever made. He's going to need the most generators we've ever seen.
A lot of power.
Right?
Yeah.
He's going to need a lot of power.
Yeah.
And one of the processes that I've always tried to follow on movie sets is, I've always asked for what I call a generator dump. Mm-hmm. Now, what a generator dump is, and you guys must know about this, I find it quite infuriating when the electricians have parked their generator in the correct space and supported me, And then suddenly I turn up on the movie set and I hear, and I think, well, that's not the electrical generator. I saw that when I drove in. It's exactly where I asked it to be. And suddenly there's a 20K running the honey wagons.
Yeah.
And suddenly there's a 12K over there running craft services.
Yeah.
And all of them are much, much closer
Yeah.
than the electrical generator. And they've just been dumped, okay? And so what I've been trying to do for the last 15 years is collaborate with all departments that need power, not just the gaffer and the electrical department, but the studio unit department, the people that are going to be servicing us, who are going to be siting the craft services generator. And what I've asked them to do is, I've always said, where I have parked the electrical generator, that's the closest generator to set. That's my line in the sand. I don't want anything closer than that. So please, with all of these other smaller generators, can you park them right behind the electrical generator? And then what I've got is, I've got a generator dump. And then what I can do is, I can say to the guys in charge of parking all of the other trucks, guys, have you got 2 articulated lorries that we can park in front of the generator dump? So suddenly I know that all of the noise from all of the generators is in one corner, and I've baffled it with 2 or 3 big 17.5-ton trucks. That's my normal workflow.
Okay.
David came to me and said, Simon, I can't do the generator dump thing. I can't put all of my generators in one corner. There isn't enough cable in the UK to be able to do that. You know, and again, picture this, guys, boating lakes, waterfalls, 40-foot walls on sets, and an expanse on each one of these sets. And there were 4 of them on the exterior. There were 4 sets, but each one is as big as 2 football fields. And he said, what I've got to do, Simon, because we're running soft suns above the set so that we can make sure that we've got that we've got weather continuity. Because remember, in the UK, we're cloudy, like you guys are here in Slovakia.
Yeah.
We can't guarantee sun even in the middle of summer. And so what Alice and David were supplying John Chu so that they had this visual continuity of a sunny day were lots of ARRI soft suns. Now, those are 200 kilowatt lamps. They need power, right? And we had a lot of them. And so what David said was, what I've got to do, Simon, is I've got to have a generator, a 200 kilowatt generator in every corner.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And he said, there isn't any other way around it. I can't cable this any other way. And my first thing was, being a little naive, to be honest, was, but when we're up that end of the set, can't we turn those 2 generators off because we're not? And he was like, not really. He said, it depends, but there's always going to be, we're shooting multiple cameras. There's always going to be one camera that's looking deep that way, and I'm going to need to have those soft suns turned on. He said, I can't guarantee that. He said, really, Simon, we've got to go into this with you assuming that all 4 of these generators are going to be turned on at all times. So I'm like, we're surrounding this set with generators. So I kind of thought, I wonder if David's going to be up for this. I wonder how supportive he's going to be. And I said, David, he said, well, what do you need? If I put one in each corner of the set, how can I help you? Can we build baffles? And I said, what you can do for me is you can put each generator at least 100 meters from the corner of the set that it's supplying power to. Mm-hmm. And he said, no problem.
Okay.
Just like that, no problem. These generators were 100 meters from each corner. And as you know, if we've got 30, 40-foot walls on the set, and outside those walls, we've then got 100 meters to a blimped 200 kilowatt generator, we're not going to hear it on the set. Mm-hmm. We're not going to hear it at all. Now, to be able to do that, he obviously had to have the support of production, because it's not just about cable. Yeah. It's about the fact that vehicles have to drive around behind these sets, Manitous, moving lights, moving technocranes. They can't drive over the cables. Yeah. These cables are going to need to have scaffold bridges built so that we can drive big vehicles underneath the cables, okay? This is a lot of rigging. Yeah. This is a lot of money, okay? This isn't what a normal producer on a normal movie is going to have to deal with. But just to boil this down into how collaborative this whole live vocal acquisition was, production absolutely supported this every step of the way. When David went to them and said, I need these amount of riggers for these amount of extra days because Simon has asked for this, that was given to him. Because above all else, all of us on that movie set were here to capture live production vocals. And that, as I said right at the start of this, isn't just about the production sound mixer and the production sound team and putting some mics on. It starts deep in prep, and every single element of this film has to be supportive of that. And that includes understanding that we're going to have to put the generators 100 meters away and that we're going to have riggers on each corner for an extra 3 days building scaffold bridges for the cables to reach the set. And that was part of the process, and that's part of the support network. That's part of the teamwork, and that's why we got it done, because everyone was there to support John Chu's vision.
That's mind-blowing. Really, really mind-blowing.
Yeah, like
Cannot
you need to
imagine.
process this, because we usually, the things that we did, it's small movies. We just show up and sometimes hope for the best, because it's not like putting so much effort in pre-production because it costs money. But in such a scale, when you started with Wicked, how long it took the preparation, and were there some specific like steps in the pre-production that was maybe specific for this one? For example, let's just take the pre-recording. It was done in the studios, or?
Wicked was a very, very unique project. I had my first meeting with John Chu.
Yeah.
He explained the process to me. I said, hell yeah. Please, can I come and do this movie, John? And the next day I was offered the movie. We had a great first meeting and we just kind of clicked. And it's not hard to click with John Chu. He is a passionate filmmaker. He's just as passionate as all of those students of yours that I spoke to yesterday. He has that same sparkle in his eye and that same inquisitive passion in his voice as young filmmakers have.
Yeah.
That hasn't been dulled down over the years with John. He's still excited about filmmaking. And I'm still excited about filmmaking. And so immediately that was common ground that we had. That's not always there. It's not there on every project. But there was this excitement that we had this project, that John was talking to me about this, his vision, and it was kind of unique. So I got offered the movie the next day and, of course, immediately said yes. And then I had a conversation with line producer Joan Schneider, who'd been working very, very closely with David Nixey, another producer. And one of the things that they were floating an idea of was the fact that it was going to be really, really difficult and obstructive to get Cynthia and Ari primarily, and everyone else, but it was Cynthia and Ari's schedules that were difficult, to be able to send them off to one of the central London recording studios that we would normally use for pre-records. It was an hour to get there if the traffic was good. If the traffic's bad, it's an hour and 15, an hour and 20. To be able to take them away from all of their other responsibilities in prep, to send them off to do those pre-records, seemed like it was a bit of a, it was going to be difficult. And so David had this idea from a previous film where he'd done a smaller version of this, was, why don't we build a music recording studio?
Wow.
So,
Okay.
and remember that Sky Studios Elstree had only just, they were rushing to finish this studio build. It was literally, it's a massive new facility,
Yeah.
but we were the first movie in. And we were actually, I think that our schedule, we were actually looking like at one point, like we might have to delay principal photography for a couple of weeks because the stages weren't ready. We still, when we moved into the stage, there were still people outside, like, you know, putting the doors on the toilets and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, it was brand new. So there wasn't anything like that there. There was no Foley stage. There was no re-recording stage. That, you know, the kind of stuff that there might be at Pinewood or Shepperton, there was none of that infrastructure. There was just a bunch of brand new, very, very high quality, but brand new sound stages. What David and Joan did to create more office space and space for choreography was they rented a big office building just across the road.
Okay.
And there was a floor that they dedicated to the music department. And on that floor, David had this idea that we could put in a music recording studio.
Like a real one.
Professional one.
Well, I'm going to go this far. It wasn't just like a real one. By the time we finished it, it was world class.
Okay.
So the music supervisor that I worked really closely with over a number of movies, we were also going to collaborate again on Wicked. Her name is Maggie Rodford. And a lot of music supervisors in the film industry, by the very nature of what they do, have a background in the music industry. Maggie is one of the best connected music supervisors in the world. She knows everyone, not just from film, but also from the music industry. She has an incredible wealth of friends, collaborators and colleagues at Abbey Road Studios, as an example. Air Studios, these are the big studios in the UK. And so me and Maggie started talking immediately when we found out from Joan and David's idea of supporting the actors and their schedules and taking a little bit of pressure off them by being able to say, we've got a recording facility on site. You don't need to go and get in a car. You know, you can come in and out of there as you please around the rest of your responsibilities, which again, this whole mindset is based around supporting our talent, taking technical pressure and time pressure off them so that they can engage more fully with the creative process and becoming the characters of Elphaba and Galinda. So Maggie started talking to me and she said, look, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to a couple of my contacts and tell them the size of the space that I've got, what we're trying to achieve, and get a sonic architect who would normally be building professional music sound studios, get him to draw up and spec the studio. She got those specs. Those specs then were given to some of our film construction department. Nathan Crowley, our production designer, broke off some of his construction department from the massive set builds that were going on 25 miles away and on the stages. He broke off a small team of them and lent them to the music department.
Wow.
And what they did was they looked at the specs for this music recording studio that were professional specs, and they then built the music recording studio to the exact spec that was required. Now, there's other elements here. It gets even more exciting. Our music producer, the guy that produced all of the backing tracks for Wicked, the movie, is Greg Wells. Greg Wells is like, I mean, as far as music producers go, he's like a rock star, okay? And what happened then was Maggie went to Greg and said, look, we're going to be doing the pre-records at this studio that we're building. We understand that you're going to come over and help with those pre-records and you know, you're going to produce the pre-records, produce the music. And Greg said, well, if we're starting from scratch, what I'd really like is for you to build this studio equipment-wise so that it's exactly the same as my studio in the US.
Okay.
Carbon copy.
Carbon copy. So that Greg could get off a plane, sit down at the studio, and it's as if he's sitting in his own studio. So we got the equipment list from Greg, and at that point, we had the film construction team. We had Maggie coordinating this whole build. The film construction team were obviously working to the blueprint, but they're not going to be able to cable it up. So Maggie was like on the phone to me saying, well, you know, we need to think about who we're going to hire to cable it up. And I was like, wait a second. Now, my second unit production sound mixer, who's been supporting me and doing incredibly creative work alongside me in the background, just making me shine, to be honest with you, is Tom Barrow. He joined me on Mary Poppins and he's done every movie since. One of the reasons why I chose him to be my second unit production sound mixer is because I knew that my career had moved heavily into musicals. And I knew that although Tom is a production sound mixer and an incredible technician, you know, if we drop a sound device's Scorpio on the floor and it doesn't work anymore, Tom will take it apart and it'll be working in 10 minutes. Beautiful. Okay, that's how good he is as a technician. However, there's another skill set. He'd started his career as an adult in the music industry as a studio engineer. And so his first 10 years was in the music business. And so I said, Maggie, I know I've got just the plan here. And I phoned Tom and I said, look, you know that we're not starting Wicked for another 5 or 6 months? And he was like, yeah, I'm waiting. I'm ready to go. And I was like, how about you become the project manager and you cable up this whole deal, okay? You can go in, work with the construction team who have just started work on the build 2 weeks ago. You can get the cable holes put where you need them. You can order the cable that you need. You can coordinate with Maggie these pieces of equipment coming from all over the world that Greg Wells would like in his studio. So again, what we're talking about here is a collaboration of people that already work together many times, coming together to build a world-class recording studio. And what we got for those pre-records, which were a 2.5 minute walk from the sound studios, okay? So that Ari and Cynthia and all of the other cast could say, okay, well, I've got choreography rehearsals this morning with John Chu and 50 dancers. Then this afternoon, I'm going over to Paul Tazewell's to try on a couple of costumes that he's just had made. But we've got a 2.5 hour window where I could go and do the pre-records for Popular. That 2.5 window, had it also included an hour into central London, an hour back, you can see how this makes sense and how supportive it was for our cast. And again, we can talk about cabling up systems and Greg Wells' mixing desk and what studio monitors he wanted to use. All of that falls into the background. We must keep laser focused on our primary objective, which is supporting our cast and helping them become Galindra and Elphaba.
Immediately there's a question that pops to my head. If you have this facility for recording music, you as a production sound mixer, you can go and you can interact between like music and sound department. The thing that you said on the workshop and earlier, you need to blend the vocal from actual performance live and the vocal performance in the studio. So was there some collaboration also on this music studio, like between the production sound team and the music department recording the pre-dubs?
Victor, it's a really good question. The first thing is, and I can't stress this strongly enough, I intensely dislike the idea that on a musical there is a sound department and a music department. We all have the same primary objectives, and that's making the soundtrack of our film as good as it can possibly be. Of course, within that, there's live vocals, there's honesty, there's fragility, there's realness. We've spoken about that. But let's take a step back just from those live vocals, and let's just talk about the soundtrack generally. Let's talk about the score, the orchestration, the dialogue, the sound effects, and let's talk about the way this all mixes together. We expect it all, when we go to the cinema, to be a cohesive piece of work that supports the visual image. Why on earth would we then have a demarcation between the different elements? And so one of the things that I've tried to do as a production sound mixer on musicals from the get-go, from my very first musical, was say, what is this thing about the music department and the sound department? And I've always said to the music supervisor, can we just put these departments together? And what I'm going to do as a production sound mixer is I'm going to ask all of my sound team, all of my ASs, my ProTools operator, the whole lot of them, to support you as an HOD. And if you ask for something, it will be the same as if I've asked for something. Their answer will be, yes, no problem, let's get that done. And what I would ask you to do is to ask your team to treat me in the same way as they would treat you. That way, we together can run this team and it will be a more cohesive and productive team. What's that going to do for the movie? I think it's going to create a more cohesive and productive final mix. Why wouldn't it? Why would we have these demarcations? These demarcations are not appropriate for modern day movie musicals. They're not appropriate, and they were built on some kind of tradition from 50, 60 years ago. And we've just kind of all carried on with that tradition. Sometimes traditions need respecting.
Yeah.
Other times traditions need ripping up and throwing in the bin.
Yeah.
Right? And the best way of making a movie musical, especially with live vocals, is putting the sound department and the music department together from the get-go and having them work as one team. Mm-hmm. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? But it doesn't always happen. It sounds so obvious, but it doesn't always happen. Now, if we can take that one step further, production sound, post-production sound. Why is there a demarcation there? Sometimes that demarcation is just because of tradition, but often that demarcation is because the movie is a size of movie, a budget of movie, or the post-production guys just haven't been chosen yet because the director doesn't have a normal team. But that demarcation can sometimes exist because the production sound departments start well before the post-production sound department. So it's very difficult to have a cohesive and inclusive relationship when those guys don't exist yet. I get that. But on a movie like Wicked, they know exactly who's going to be doing post-production sound before we start shooting. Not only do they know on a movie like Wicked, on Wicked, they knew exactly who it was going to be because it was John Marquis and Nancy Nugent-Title who had already worked with John Chu and were his people. They'd been his support network for a number of movies. Andy Nelson was also brought in, who I've collaborated with before, and I honestly see as a mentor. I've learnt so much about my recording techniques from talking to Andy about what I've delivered to him and how he has made my tracks work on live sung movie musicals. So there was already a shorthand between us. So not only on Wicked did we blend the sound department and the music department and make a sound stroke music department where we were all one entity, but we also did that with post-production. I had long talks with Nancy Nugent-Title, who was going to be dealing with my tracks immediately, on Zoom. She was based in LA, but we had long talks from the very, very embryonic stages of me starting to think about my ingredients, which would become my workflows, and why I was making certain decisions based on the narrative, the story, the backing track, and whether it was a slow, emotional backing track or whether it was a big, poppy, rhythmic dance number. Yeah. Okay, what the set design was like that we were working on, what the action that John Chu's choreography entailed with Chris's choreographer. So Nancy was there from the get-go. I was bouncing ideas off her. She was, asking me for things, and if she needed something, then that was no problem because it's my job to say yes. It's my job to, if my workflow needs adjusting, to supply something specific for sound post that I hadn't considered, then I don't know it all, and everyone's got their own unique creative needs. And it's my job to make sure that I give those guys choices. And so there was a conduit of information from the very, very beginning on this show where it wasn't post-sound, production sound, and music department. It was the music and sound department. And that included all of us. And all of us were aware of what each other were doing from the very beginning. Now, Viktor, I'm aware that I probably haven't answered your question quite as directly as you'd have liked me to. So let me get down to the nitty-gritty. When you talk about, is there kind of some collaboration between production and music because we've got this music studio, and did that create an opportunity to be more collaborative? Absolutely. So one of the things that we've always done is we have always made sure that we're putting a boom mic, generally a Sherps CMC 6 MK41, above the vocals that we're recording for the pre-records. Not only are they going to be recording into their studio condenser, which will be Greg Wells's choice. And for people that are interested, I believe that Greg used a mixture of Neumann and Telefunken studio condensers. Okay. Those were his choices. depending on who the vocal was on and what the song was.
Okay.
He would choose one of those mics. I don't want to give too much away because those are his secret ingredients, but I can go that far. But what I can tell you is that on every one of those vocals, there was a CMC6 MK41 Sherps, which is my favorite vocal boom mic. Whether we're talking dialogue or singing, doesn't matter. It's all the human voice, and that is the best, most transparent microphone, I think, to capture that. And also, of course, a DPA lav.
This is the thing that I was curious about.
So we've put a lav on every single one of those pre-records. Now we always do that. I've been doing that for a number of years.
Wow.
And me and Andy Nelson kind of came up with this, I think over lunch one day, where we were like, well, why doesn't that happen? Well, and it's crazy that doesn't happen. And I thought to myself, he's just made a great point. And the next musical I did, we put that into place. But what was really incredible about having the on-set ability to do those pre-records on Wicked was that because we were close by, because we were prepping, Maggie Rodford could phone me up and say, Simon, Cynthia's coming in at midday. She's going to do a 90-minute session. And I could turn around to Arthur, who's helping me prep the sound gear, who's my first AS and also does my lavs, and say, Arthur, midday, you need to be over at the recording studio. Now, despite the fact that it didn't really require Arthur to put the lav on Cynthia and to set the boom, it could have been done by someone else.
Yeah.
But what that did was it introduced Arthur as a key collaborator to our cast many, many months before he was going to be with a full film crew trying to put lav mics on difficult costumes when someone's having to get changed fast in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere when people are cold and shivering. Creating that relationship where Arthur was seen as part of the close team that are not just there as the sound guys, but a part of that studio recording team and are responsible right from the get-go on that first day that either Ari or Cynthia arrived in that recording studio, it starts to build trust. It starts to build familiarity. It starts to build a collaboration where Arthur becomes an accepted part of the background. And he doesn't get seen on the movie set as that sound guy wants to put a radio on me. He starts to be seen a little bit like, and this is what we strive for, a little bit like a key costumier. Mm-hmm. Or one of those guys' makeup artists. Yeah. In other words, they're always there. They're not right there in front of them, but they're always 3 steps behind, ready to support their actor.
Part of the inner circle.
Yeah. Part of the inner circle. Thank you, Miro. That's exactly what I meant. So by having Arthur in that studio, putting that lav on, saying, hey, how are you doing today? Just going to stick the lav on. Let's just adjust the sharps. Okay, ready to go. And then just sit in the background and be there to take the lav off at the end. 5 months before we started shooting, creates Arthur's role as part of that inner circle. Now, it also, as well as having that emotional positivity from a human perspective, it also has a technical positivity because Arthur has already been to see the drawings that Paul Tazewell, the costume designer, has very, very graciously and openly shown us, because at that point there were no costumes made yet, but he openly shared his drawings with Arthur, and Arthur would say, well, look, I know on this song, Ari's going to have a dress that drops right down low and comes up the side here. So I know the DPAs are going to be slightly wider. We're going to need to put 2 DPAs on this pre-record, because I know that when we shoot this, she's going to have 2 DPAs on, one on the left and one on the right. And the reason we've got to have 2 is in case she turns her head off one of them. So we've got 2 tracks, always on mic. And so with that kind of knowledge base, not only were we getting a DPA on for the pre-record, we were pretty much ballpark getting it into the same position it would be on the set.
I think there is one beautiful thing, that if Arthur did this 5 months before the actual production, then on the production it was not the sound guy, it was Arthur for them.
Exactly that.
Yeah. And it was not some random guy, yeah.
And you know, the thing about this is these actors have got, look, as much as Ari and Cynthia became Galinda and Elphaba, it's not easy. You know, they're coming onto set and they're singing for 8 hours, 9 hours straight every day. They're not just singing. It's not just a concert for them. They're acting.
Yeah.
They're becoming these characters. They're living and breathing these emotions. And what they need around them is just support. They don't need new faces. They don't need they just need comfort. They just need the equivalent of just a really nice, comfortable blanket. And that's what these people around them are. And we needed to make sure that the guy who was going to be putting the mics on was part of that comfortable blanket.
Can you please introduce us your sound team? Because you are telling about Arthur, about thumper, and can you just introduce us how you picked the right people for this project and what was the size of your team at production?
Well, remember, it's a really great question.
Yeah.
Because remember, you've just spoken about the sound team.
Yeah.
And it's the sound and music team.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is going to be a long list of people, but we were all key collaborators on the set.
Okay.
Everyone that I'm going to mention was on the set. First of all, my key first assistant sound, Arthur Fenn. He's been with me since Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. We've done 65 movies together. I believe that Wicked was number 65.
Wow.
So he's been there from the get-go. And he was with me at the start when we were just using booms and we weren't using radio mics because we were so scared of using radio mics. And then when we started multi-tracking and we started going multi-camera, Arthur became an expert in radio mics. That's his skill set. He's an expert boom operator and he does the miking. We don't give that job to the second AS, unlike lots of my colleagues. Arthur saw the movie industry change and lavs become extremely important when we started using multi-cameras. And he said, well, listen, it's a microphone and I do the microphones.
Okay.
Then a really important backbone of my team is Robin Johnson, who is also first assistant sound. Him and Arthur are on exactly the same level. Robin does the other boom, and I'm not going to say second boom, because we don't treat the booms as first and second boom. We treat the booms as a cohesive piece of teamwork. It's not that one boom op is slightly higher than the other boom op. They are both going to break down a scene, assess how to boom operate it, and boom operate it in the manner that is best for the scene, not in the manner that has some kind of doff of the hat to hierarchy. They instinctively know how each other are going to boom. I think Robin has done 60 movies with us. So, you know, there's a lot of experience there.
And relationship.
There's a relationship, there's a shorthand, there's a love, there's a respect, there's a collaboration. It's the whole package.
After all these movies, maybe even they do not have to tell each other what they are, what their plan is, because they know what the other one is thinking.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And not only do they know what each other are thinking, they know exactly what I'm thinking, and I know what they're thinking. So this is the core team that has been together since the beginning.
And can I ask one thing about this? If you're mentioning your team on social media, or you always put first key assistant, for me the key, it means like it's a crucial person for you that's representing your...
Let me tell you what key means.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean crucial because Robin's crucial too.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to do this job without Robin. Honestly, me and Arthur would fall apart without Robin.
Yeah.
Okay? We need him. He needs us. We are all part of one unit.
It's ecosystem.
Yeah. It's an ecosystem. It's like the human body. It's the liver, the kidneys, and the heart. It's no good having one without the other.
Yeah.
Okay. But what key means is this. It means that it is Arthur that is going to be the person on the floor that runs the sound department. In other words, he will be the person that communicates directly with John Chu and with the first assistant director, Jack Ravenscroft, on this movie. He is going to be the person that talks directly with Alice Brooks on a shot-for-shot basis about any shadow issues. He is going to be the person that when they're trying to work something out, goes to the DIT tent and sees David Smith, our fantastic friend, the gaffer, with Alice there, and speaks about potentially a little boom shadow on a shoulder and how we're going to deal with that and it's not going to happen again. That's what Arthur's going to be. He's going to be the person talking to Jack Ravenscroft, the first AD, about exactly where the Pro Tools cue is going to come in, on what bar of the music, where we're going to start. That's what key means. Now, that's not to say that Robin can't have those conversations with Alice or with David or with Jack, and he will a lot of the time, because remember, Arthur could also be in the background in Cynthia's tent or Ari's tent putting on a mic. And at that point, Robin will become the person on the set. But if Robin and Arthur are both on the set, he is the one voice. And the way that the film industry works, as you guys know, is there needs to be one voice. And especially if that voice can't be me, because I've got to be sat in a truck attached to a live keyboard, 48 channels of Pro Tools, a 40 kilowatt sound system, 2 Voice of God microphones, a load of IEMs. I can't be on the edge of the set. I'd like to be, and when I can be, I will be, but I'm also ultra confident that I can leave that job to Arthur. He's a people person, and that's what key means. That's not to take anything away from Robin, because what Robin's doing as my first AS is doing all of the stuff that aren't me and Arthur's primary skill sets. He's dealing with, just for the sound and music department alone, 50 frequencies on Wicked, okay? That's without the rest of the coordination that he is responsible for with the lighting department's allocated frequency plots, the special effects department's allocated frequency plots, every single Terra deck on every single camera, whether it's to pull remote focus, whether it's to pull iris from the DIT tent, all of that's radio real estate. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Robin has taken an overall coordination role in that as well. Now, that certainly isn't me and Arthur's skill set. I think that we'd probably stumble quite badly if we were left with that responsibility. When it comes to rigging 100 meters of AES to 12 radio mics, and deciding whether we're going to be running 50 milliwatts, 100 milliwatts, or whatever, that is all Robin's skill set. Dante networks, Robin. We need Pro Tools to be further than 100 meters away. We need to convert Dante to MADI, Robin. You see, so we are all bouncing off each other, and we all have highly separate and individualized and specialized skill sets that when you put them all together, you've got something very, very powerful. When you take them apart, they're just individual skill sets. But when you put them together, there's a collaboration that creates something powerful. Second AS, Taz Fairbanks, Natasha. She was highly recommended. This was her second movie with us. The first movie hasn't been out yet. It's Disney's Snow White, which was also a live musical. Okay. So when we came into Wicked, we already knew that, firstly, Taz had nailed it on Snow White. Secondly, we hired her on Snow White because she came so highly recommended. But here's the thing with my second ASs, and I'm quite pleased about this. I think it's a really positive part of maybe a contribution that I've managed to make to the film industry. And that is because Robin and Arthur haven't gone anywhere. Arthur was very clear from the get-go that he didn't want to be a production sound mixer. So was Robin. They want to excel and be the very best that they can be at their jobs. And that's what they've chosen to do with their careers. But it also creates a situation for our second ASs where there is no career path beyond Arthur and Robin, because Arthur and Robin aren't going to shift out of the way for them to become a first AS. And so we kind of know, and I'm now this many years in, very, very clear with our second ASs, and that is you will be a really, really highly valued and required person on our set. But there's going to reach a time, and it may be in 2 years or it may be in 4 years, that decision will be up to you, where you're going to need to move on because there isn't going to be an opening at the top. And some of the people that have been me, Arthur and Robin's second ASs, let's talk about Jamie Gamble, who's now a highly respected production sound mixer in Los Angeles. Let's talk about Ben Greaves, again, a highly well-respected production sound mixer in Los Angeles. Let's talk about Ben Jeffs, who is now Stuart Wilson's first AS.
Wow.
Okay, these are the quality of the people that I think that me and Arthur and Robin have been nurturing and building. We've shown them our workflow. We've shown them how we do things. And I'm sure that they haven't taken every element. I'm sure that sometimes they've said, what those guys do around that is nuts, and thrown it away. But that's how we build ourselves as film technicians. We take the best elements from everyone we work with, and that's how we build ourselves into a better technician. And I like to think that probably most of the elements that these guys that I've just named have taken away from us have helped them in their careers. And I think the level of work that they're doing and the sort of people that they're working with is the proof in the pudding. So Taz Fairbanks has been with us for 2 movies. She's the second AS. She's rigging 40 kilowatts of sound reinforcement on a Wicked set, which is as big as 2 football fields. Yeah. And she's putting a JBL speaker, a full range, big JBL speaker on her shoulder, and she's marching, okay, right? She's not playing. She's there to get the job done. Big up Taz. She's also highly skilled as a recordist in her own right. If I need her to go and get me an Atmos track, she'll pull whatever machine, whether it's a Zaxcom Diva, a Sound Devices 688 that I've got lying around, or a Zoom, whatever, okay, or Electrosonics SPDR. Taz, go and grab the Electrosonic Spider, take it over there and get an Atmos. No problem, Simon. I don't need to set, and by the way, this is the gain levels you need to set. This is no problem, Simon. I'll be back in half an hour. Okay, so this again is it's a powerhouse of a technician. Taz is assisted by third ASs. We didn't have the same third AS throughout the whole of Wicked for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is because the person that started as the third AS was doing us a favour. He was actually a second AS, but I begged him to come and be my third AS until second unit started. And that's Billy Hayes, who's my son. He was our third AS for the start of Wicked. But the moment second unit started with Tom Barrow, he went to do what he really does, which is second AS on Tom Barrow's team. And then at that point, we had 2 fantastic young people, both of whom have studied at the National Film and Television School in Beaconsfield. I really like to support those guys. I know you support your local National Film School. Yeah. I do the same thing in the UK. I did a short course at the National Film School when I was 21 years old, and that meant a lot to me. And although it was only a short course, it was a marker in my journey. And so whenever I've got time between shows, I always try and get back and talk to the new students. And both Harry and Emily are graduates of that sound course. And so both of those were chosen primarily because they came from the NFTS, and secondarily because they were highly recommended. They were like top of the class. So Harry did a bit, he was great. Emily Compton did a bit, she was great. And those guys are there to support Taz. So me, Arthur and Robin are part of the lifeblood of Wicked. We are there thinking about the emotions, thinking about the characters, and thinking about the big picture. And guys, it's really, really important that sound technicians think about the big picture. It's not just about sound. It's about what this film is going to look like in the cinema and how it's going to impact the audience. That's primary, and that's what me and Arthur and Robin are thinking about. What Taz is doing is she's giving us the time and the space and the support to be able to apply ourselves on an emotional and creative level while she picks up the pieces and gets the JBLs to the top of the 30-foot set, okay, and goes off and records the Atmos that I didn't have time to do. Talks to Harry or Emily or Billy about how many carpets she needs to carpet 50 dancers because we've just gone in closer and we can get rid of this footfall. She's the technical support that is operating in her own ecosystem. She generally doesn't need us telling her what to do. It's generally just happening and giving us the space to concentrate on a creative level. And that's really important. So, Josh Winslade, Pro Tools music editor on the set. I don't like the term Pro Tools operator. It's so much more than that. Just because someone can operate Pro Tools, it doesn't mean that they can come and support live vocals with two major recording artists on a set with John Chu, who wants to be super creative with his camera moves. The music needs to fit the camera move, not the other way round. If we need to make an intro half the length or twice as long, it needs to happen. Here's something else that's interesting. Ariana Grande, she's a Pro Tools expert.
Okay.
Really?
Right?
Wow.
So here's the thing. If John Chu asks for something and I've got a Pro Tools operator that isn't absolutely on the ball, it's going to look pretty silly if our leading actress, one of our leading actresses, knows that she could have done that on Pro Tools twice as fast as the operator. And by the way, she'd be able to, right? Honestly.
Wow.
Okay.
Oh.
So Josh Winslade, Pro Tools music editor, so much more than a Pro Tools operator. And the difference is it someone that understands Pro Tools or is it someone that understands music? Okay. Pro Tools is just the tool.
Yeah.
It's just the instrument for the musician. It's not the knowledge of the score. It's not the knowledge of the rhythm. It's not the knowledge of the DNA of Wicked. Now, Josh moved up on Wicked. We had a fantastic Pro Tools music editor called Viktor, who moved on after Snow White to become a music supervisor in his own right. So again, when we talk about, and you know, I'm really proud of this, when we talk about the people that have worked with us and then moved on to something bigger and better, Viktor's again on that list of people. He just did the Amy Winehouse project as the music supervisor, for example. So Josh had been our rehearsals Pro Tools music editor on Snow White. He'd knocked it out the ballpark. He understood Viktor's workflow, and Viktor's workflow was like, Viktor, one of the top guys from Abbey Road before he came out on the road with us.
Oh.
Okay, so you can understand the level immediately. I don't need to discuss this any further. But Josh learnt Viktor's workflow. He took everything that Viktor showed him. And when Viktor decided that he couldn't do Wicked because he needed to make a positive career move into supervision, Josh was ready to jump in. And we used a style of Viktor's workflow, which was tailored specifically for Wicked. So it wasn't exactly the same, because remember, there's no such thing as exactly the same. Yeah. We have to look at every project on its own merit and build a workflow and a bunch of ingredients for that particular meal that we're going to be cooking. And Wicked was a unique meal. So we put together a specific Pro Tools track for Wicked for Josh, which was based on Viktor's cart, but also, if you like, we put a big turbo on it as well. Okay. And we turned up the boost and put a massive intercooler on it. Okay? And that was the Wicked Pro Tools cart.
1,000 horsepower Pro Tools rig.
It was 1,000 horsepower and it could run at that capacity all day. So yeah, we built a Pro Tools cart for Wicked that enabled Josh to not only be the Pro Tools music editor, but also to be, if you like, the best way I can describe it is, you know, the IEM mixer. So he was mixing IEMs for Ari and for Cynthia and for Jonathan Bailey and for Jeff Goldblum.
So you had 4 unique channels? Of
Four
IEM?
unique channels. 4 unique channels for IEMs, because unlike previous musicals that I've done, I knew that earwigs weren't going to cut it, guys. I love earwigs for their simplicity. I love the fact that we're not going to have to paint out any cables. but they are at best challenged by a broad frequency range. Okay. At worst, we could say that they sound tinny.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why I've got away with running purely earwigs on some live vocal movies is because we've only been using a keyboard to support the live vocals. That's a different type of movie. That's not Wicked. As I've said to you before, Wicked has a... And that is the heartbeat of Wicked, and it is running through the whole of this movie. And with that heartbeat, there is a tempo. And when there's a tempo, there generally isn't a free-flowing live keyboard. What there is a beautifully produced, bass-heavy, thumping Greg Wells backing track. And I can't put that into a tiny little earwig, which only goes from, let's say, 350 hertz to, 3 kilohertz.
Yeah.
Okay.
And for such a talent as Ariana Grande, I think she needs the quality in her ears.
Well, look, Cynthia and Ariana are used to having the type of support on stage that rock stars have, which is a full range, triple driver IEM with their unique personal ingredients in that mix. And that means if Ari wants one level of reverb and Cynthia wants another, it's my job to say, Josh, make it happen. It's not my job to say, look, guys, we're going with global reverb on this. Can we find a compromise between the two? That's not me supporting the cast. That's me cutting corners and presenting the cast with a technical difficulty when all I want to do is say yes to them so that they can feel secure and supported. And so, yes, Ari had her own IEM mix. So did Cynthia. So did Johnny Bailey. And so did Jeff Goldblum. And when any of those guys weren't on the set, those four, the next person up in the chain would be presented with their own personal mix if they were singing solo. The demarcation, because look, guys, there is a limit, even on a musical like Wicked, there is a limit financially to what we can do, not just in terms of the provision of the IEM and the cost of that IEM and the cost of the additional mix, but also, we've got to support the budget in the cost of the removal, the potential removal of the cable. And so the great thing about earwigs is we can put them in the ear, there's no paint out. And so what we did was we said, anyone that's singing a solo can have an IEM because we need to support that emotion and fragility and magic in that original performance, in that solo. If they're joining in the chorus, if they're a chorus vocalist, despite the fact we're going to record the choruses live, they can work off the earwigs because it's more of a tempo tool. It's keeping them in time. It's not trying to support the subtle nuances and give them the reverb that they feel best supports their vocal. It's there to do a job, which is to keep them in time as chorus singers. And so who were the chorus singers? Well, it was a mixture of background actors who could sing and our dancers, the choreography team. And so we had 75 earwigs at all times for those guys, ready to go out. And me and Arthur and Robin didn't get involved in that. That's Taz's world. So that's another example of how, Taz just gets all of that thrown at her to be able to support me and Arthur and Robin. And she just goes, okay, guys, no problem.
Wow.
So we're still talking about my team, aren't we? We should keep going.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about Maggie Rodford, who I've already discussed, who comes from a music industry background, but is one of the most well-known with a huge CV of music supervisors. She was on the set most days, in between the set and her office. And she was, a creative collaborator, but also a very important part of the administration and organisation of our big team. She brought someone with us who we'd also worked with on Snow White called Ben Holder, who's the music associate. Ben Holder is just a powerhouse of passion. Ben's job was multifaceted. One of his jobs was to watch the lip sync on chorus members. It was to go and in between takes, say, Ben would be in between takes while Alice and John were discussing perhaps a crane move that they were going to adjust slightly between takes 2 and take 3. Ben would be standing on a platform in front of 140 background actors saying, now guys, on the last one, we lost the rhythm a little bit. The rhythm goes like this. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now sing with me. Bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum. And that's Ben, okay? Choosing an opportunity while John Chu and Alice are creating a slightly better crane move, getting in there and getting the background supporting actors into time better and just getting those background performances as crisp musically and vocally as possible at a time when a lot of people would be thinking, I'm not sure, it's kind of a big thing going onto a film set with 300 crew and all of those and taking control of it and understanding that you're making a lot of noise while John's talking to Alice and Jack, the first AD, saying, we need to be going again in 1 minute. Okay, and Ben saying, no problem, Jack, I'm just going to get these guys into time. That's Ben Holder. Now, also, Ben Holder's job was when Ari or Cynthia said, look, the first verse before the choreography starts, we haven't got a bass line at that point. It's more of light instrumentation. What I'd really like to do is, I feel like I'm getting tied to that backing track and I'd just like to go a little bit freer. Is there any way I can have the live keyboard in my IEM and just do the first verse without the backing track before the bass line comes in and before the kick drum and the hi-hats come in? And then at that point, and remember we're talking about major recording artists, so this level of dialogue was happening. Mm-hmm. They're actors, but they're also recording artists, so they know what's achievable. And then, one of them would be saying, and then what we can do is, on bar number 16, as the bass is about to come in, can you blend across, Josh, into the backing track? And so Ben's there playing the live keyboard on that take and creating a comfort blanket of support so that Ari or Cynthia can put an even more emotional performance into the first part of the song because they're not tied to the rhythm because the rhythm hasn't started. And then at bar 16, there's a quick crossfade from Josh where at that point, he's taking that live keyboard out of the IEM and blending straight to the pre-recorded Greg Wells backing track when the rhythm starts, or potentially, depending on the situation, leaving Ben up for a couple of bars and Ben's playing the keyboard over Greg's produced backing track in time so that there's less of a brick wall change, depending on what was required. Mm-hmm. So guys, this is, part of our support network.
So complex.
Complex.
It's like symphonic orchestra playing together a piece, and you are capturing it like the whole time. So it's
and this is exactly what we are. We're an orchestra.
Yeah.
And when you're playing as part of an orchestra, again, you're far more powerful than the way that you can play as a singular musician. And John Chu is the conductor, right?
Yeah.
And he is conducting us and we are providing the backbone of the music to support the visuals that he's also conducting. It's quite a job conducting a movie set, and that's what John was doing.
Yeah.
Then we had Dom Amendum there. Dom Amendum, part of the Wicked stage show, absolute collaborator and right-hand man to Stephen Aremus, who, although he was there as much as he could do, he's also in charge of music on Wicked in the theatre all around the world. So he couldn't be there every day, but he was there a lot. But when he wasn't there, Dom, who was there every day, Dom was there to basically support and be a sounding block for John Chu, and to make sure that at all times, what John Chu really wanted to do was, although we were making Wicked the movie, and although things were going to change, because when we're making a film, it's different to a theatre production, but although things were going to change, John absolutely respected and wanted to respect the theatre music score and what has made Wicked so successful in the theatre, and what has given Wicked millions of fans around the world. And Dom was there to basically make sure that John would be able to say, hey, Dom, I've changed that because we want to have this crane swinging over there. I've done this to that intro. Is that still working? And Dom would be like, yeah, absolutely. Stephen would love that. And that's what Dom was doing. He was just there as a creative overseer to almost be our interface between the theatre production and what the general public know as Wicked and what we were doing, to make sure that we stayed true to Wicked, the theatre production, and celebrated that in a filmic way. I think that's really important. And that was really our on-set team. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, in the other post teams, working at the same time, on the phone, popping down to the set, because remember the music studio is 2.5 minutes away, Robin Bainton. Robin Bainton was the Pro Tools music editor in the music room in Greg Wells' studio. And what he was doing was, firstly, he had intricate knowledge of every single pre-record. He had them all lined up, whether it was the DPA pre-record, the Sherps pre-record, the Telefunken or the Neumann pre-record, right? All of that was labelled up. It was all becoming part of an archive. And then as the live recordings came in from the set, on the Sherps boom, on one of the Lavaliers, right? All of those dailies wouldn't just get sent to Myron, the picture editor, and Lara, his fantastic assistant. And I can't speak highly enough about those two. But what Robin was doing was he was getting my dailies, and he was then adding my dailies to that archive of either Defying Gravity or Popular or whatever the track was. Mm-hmm. So essentially, he's a highly skilled music editor who was working, if you like, the way that a vocal comp editor would work. And he was laying out in Pro Tools all of these tracks, not necessarily at that point starting the comp process, letting the live vocals exist completely, because that's what we were out to do, and that's what John and Myron wanted to do. Myron, the picture editor, absolutely support the live performance. But Robin was laying all of these tracks out on a timeline in Pro Tools and getting ready for post, where potentially, if there was, I don't know, a door slam on one syllable of take 3, that had been the take that Myron and John had decided to use. What Robin would be able to do is to say, right, I've got takes 1 to 7 here of the live vocal on the DPAs and the Sherpses. Can I then, at that point, to get rid of that door slam, can I then go and take one of those live takes 1 to 7 and replace that syllable? Or if the timing was slightly different, or there was something a little bit weird about it, that live vocal recorded primarily on the DPA because the booms couldn't get in tight, could I, as a secondary safety element, could I go and take that syllable from the pre-record and then comp that in? And that was part of, when I talk about the very, very unique and specialized workflow of Wicked that we devised for Wicked, That's the lifeblood of that workflow. It's protecting those live performances with every ounce of effort and integrity that we possibly can, but also having a back pocket full of archived takes of other live performances and pre-records should we need them. And the pre-records were really there right in the insurance policy extra safety, because we would always try and use live wherever possible. But they're all there and they're all available. And what does that do? That enables us to support the live performances even better, because it means that with all of those different choices for the vocal comp, it's far, far less likely that we're going to need to re-record anything at the end. Then we move across into the next people in the chain who are working in Los Angeles, and that is Nancy Nugent-Title, who you know that I was already talking to 6 months before the show started, bouncing ideas, getting input about my tracks, how to deliver them. Nancy has this long-term relationship with John Marquis, her supervising sound editor partner. They're both supervising sound editors. Those two work as a team, and those two work as a team with John Chu. That's a long-term collaboration. So that existed, but we're literally, look, when you've got Zoom, the truth is it's not like an email. We can collaborate in real time with Los Angeles, and we used that. We were absolutely talking whenever we needed to. So we've got those guys in the background. We've also got Jack Dolman, who's the supervising music editor, who was working out of Los Angeles, who again is part of this whole big team, looking at what Robin Bainton was doing, listening to my live vocals, and I now know, going, oh my God, I haven't heard any live vocals like this before. This is great. Now, me and Jack also have some history. We've worked together, but although we haven't been in the same place, but he's worked on a lot of Matthew Vaughn movies, and so have I. So he already knows that I deliver, but from a dialogue perspective. But this was our first collaboration on Live Sung Musical, and it was a beautiful thing. So we've got John Marquis, supervising sound editor, who also was the re-recording mixer alongside Andy Nelson. We've got Nancy Nugent-Title, supervising sound editor. They've obviously got a team behind them in Los Angeles, and we're just working as one big cohesive team. It was the Wicked Sound and Music team, and I know that I've said this already, but I just want to hit it again because it's so important. It wasn't production sound and post-production sound, and it wasn't sound and music. It was just the Wicked music and sound team. And that, I think, comes across in the soundtrack.
I would like to steer our conversation now towards miking.
Yeah.
Because capturing the vocals and sung vocals, I can imagine that you wanted the mics to be as exposed as possible. Was there something special that enabled you to do this? Like, for example, some collaboration with VFX or something on the costume side?
Okay. It's a huge collaboration with costume and VFX. It's both. It's Paul Tazewell supporting John's vision of a live musical. Paul's the costume designer. It's him expressing the desire to help us in front of his team, and that following its way all the way through his team to understand that we've got to sometimes put two microphones on, often put two microphones on. It's also an understanding that we are going to put two microphones on in the least exposed way possible to get absolutely clean vocals. Now, sometimes that means that the microphone is going to be seen from some angles. We didn't just put them on the outside as a matter of course. If we thought that we could put them tucked behind the rim of a costume and they were still going to give us 100% clean vocals, then that's where they would go. But if, for instance, the camera came round to a profile and it's looking in and the microphone can be exposed if you freeze frame the film, then what we also knew and what we assured Paul and his team was that Pablo Hellman, the absolutely fantastically supportive and talented VFX supervisor, had our backs, and that he would basically remove that flash of a mic in VFX. There were also other situations where, for instance, on The Wizard and I, which is a song that Cynthia sings, a big part of, she didn't have her hat on. Now, Cynthia's primary microphone is just underneath the brim of her hat. Mm-hmm. But on this particular song, she wasn't wearing her hat. And her costume is a big, thick, heavy velvet chest plate. So, for instance, on that one, we had to go to Pablo and say, Pablo, we need your help, sir. The mic has to go on the outside. There isn't a way of disguising this. Now, it was a black costume, black velvet, and the microphone was black. The concealer made by Ursa was black. We were on an exterior, so it had a black bit of wind fur on it. Mm-hmm. So from the wide shots, it wasn't going to need painting out. You're not going to see it. But on the close-ups, it certainly was. But it's also, guys, nowadays, the term paint out implies that this is a difficult process. It's not. They're replacing pixels. It's not a big deal. Now, of course, it does have a cost implication, but it's not a huge cost implication. And what I would say is this: there is a cost implication of a VFX paint out. There is also a cost implication of ADR. Only one of those two have a creative implication. Only one of those two is potentially going to not support an original performance. Mm. So if we're going to spend our money somewhere, don't you think that we should spend it on the factor that doesn't have a creative implication? In other words, VFX. Yeah. Now, the more advanced VFX gets and the more open-minded and supportive and fantastically collaborative VFX supervisors like Pablo Hellman can be there to help their directors by using VFX to support the story, to support the narrative, and not just build the world behind the sets, but also potentially to save that original performance that the focus is on. When that camera puts the focus on something, it's putting the focus on the eyes and the mouth of the actor and their performance, okay? And if the lav is there, okay, and to protect that in-focus performance, we need to remove the lav, then the VFX department can do it. What we try and do, and what we endeavour to do, is not give them an unnecessary paint out. If we can hide the microphones, we will. But if hiding the microphones means that we're going to negatively impact that live vocal that we've been asked to supply, that's when we're going to turn to the VFX department and hopefully have the collaboration and support, which was there in abundance on Wicked.
And what about the situation when you need to expose the mic, but the costume is not black? Like, you know, you used a black fur. It's ideal scenario. Black, white, beige, that's what we are used to.
Yeah, but the costumes in Wicked, I think it was more colors.
Absolutely. So let's talk about Ari, Galinda, who wears a lot of pink. Yeah. Pink goes great with green. Yeah. Okay.
It's like not a common color. Yeah.
She wears a lot of pink. Yeah. She wears a lot of white. Now, there were times, a lot of times, where Ari was on an exterior and there was a lot of wind. Ari was wearing a low-cut dress and we had the mics in the side, as I explained earlier, and we had to bring them out and put furry covers on them.
Okay.
And those furry covers, I think we used Bumblebee furry covers for them, were white and fluffy, but so was all of the very ornate frills around the edge of her dress.
Yeah.
And so if you looked at these white fluffy microphones, you would kind of assume that they were part of the dress, but they were very much an exposed DPA with a wind gag. But they didn't look out of place. Now, I'm not saying that those made their way into the movie. Of course not. That would be incredibly disrespectful to Paul Tazewell and his costumes. They were removed by Pablo. But what they did do was throughout the avid cutting process, when the film was potentially going to audience test screenings, production executive test screenings, John Chu's got to sit there day after day cutting with Myron. What they weren't doing was jumping out of the screen and saying there's two lavs there. They looked kind of uniform with the costume. And what that meant was, firstly, they weren't pulling people out of the avid cut when they were viewing it. It wasn't like, there's a microphone. It just kind of looked like part of the costume. Pablo removed them later as part of the VFX deliverable, but they weren't obtrusive and they weren't something that was going to stop a test screening testing so well because, hey, she's still got mics on. And I can remember particularly that specific costume where John Chu turned to Arthur and said, hey, Arthur, I can see Ari's mics. And Arthur, who's always stood right there because he's right there on the set with John, he's the key first AS, said, John, don't worry, Pablo's got our backs. And John just said, that's great news. And that was the conversation, right? It wasn't, oh my God, there's a microphone. It wasn't this kind of old school traditional suspicion and dislike of microphones. It was the response of a modern filmmaker who knew that if VFX had said that it wasn't going to be a problem, it was nothing worth worrying about. And actually, let's stay laser focused because that's what John Chu does extremely well. Let's stay laser focused on the task. What's the task here? Telling the story. How are we telling the story? With live vocals. How are we doing that? With these microphones. VFX need to remove them later. That's great, no problem. Yeah. And John never mentioned a microphone again. That was the one and only time. And there were lots of times like that where I know he saw them, but it was enough that Arthur had said once to him, don't worry, John, Pablo's got our back. And again, let's talk about the way that Arthur said that. That's basically saying, hey, John, someone on this inner circle, this team, this support network around you that you've built to support your vision has said no problem. And part of being a great team leader, which is what John Chu is, isn't then trying to micromanage it. It's just saying, I don't need to worry about that. I can stay focused on the performance. And that really is the essence of filmmaking.
Yeah, and for example, if you are with such colors of costumes, do you bring some custom solutions?
We have a really strong relationship with Simon Bish at Ursa. We've been working with Simon since he started the company. He's a behind-the-scenes collaborator with us. I think probably some people listening to this podcast will already know that he's created solutions for us on other movies. Yeah. And there is a back chat going on, a conduit of information being passed backwards and forwards that I'm not even aware of between Arthur and Simon Bish, where Arthur will say, listen, Simon, I've just seen Madame Morrible, Michelle Yeoh's costume, and it's a strange colour with flecks of gold in it. I really need a concealer that is going to disguise our mic so that if we get a flash and we've got the mic right on the edge of the costume, it's not going to stick out like a sore thumb. And this colour is kind of weird. And Simon will be like, Arthur, can you get me a quick photograph? Send it to me now on WhatsApp. And within 24 hours, the concealer has been manufactured and turned up on the set. Well, and it's that kind of support that we've built with our colleagues, and it's that kind of support that Ursa are giving to the UK film industry and now the worldwide film industry. We were there right at the beginning with them, and we have this, it's just really like they've got our backs behind the scenes. We're at the sharp end on the movie set, making the movies, and to be able to have these collaborative conversations with people like Paul Tazewell, the costume designer, and Pablo Hellman, the VFX supervisor. If we're turning up with Ursa 4061 DPA concealers that are the exact same color as the costume, it just shows willing. It shows that we're prepared to go that one step further than perhaps the previous sound department that these guys have worked with. It shows them that we're being professional. And who's making that happen behind the scenes? Ursa straps.
This is perfect because, for example, this is how you can save the money. In the wide shots, it won't be seen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're not going to need to paint out on the wide.
So we are helping the VFX.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And guys, I also must stress to you that this wasn't just live sung vocals on DPA lavs. We had Sherps booms at all times. We were using the new CMD 42 preamp, which converts the signal from the capsule into digits, 24-bit, 48 kilohertz. We were converting at the microphone end so that we're going as pure as possible. I mean, it's the first time on this movie where we're digital all the way through the chain. And I know that lots of people say, yeah, well, I'm digital, but they're using a 48 volt microphone down a cable or through a radio link. It's not digital all the way through the chain. It's digital once it hits the recorder and the fader surface. But I'm a strong believer in the earlier we can get into the digital domain, the better it's going to be and the more sonic purity there's going to be. And when Robin Bainton, the Pro Tools music editor back at the music studio, is starting to archive all of the live vocals that I'm delivering, they match those studio vocals just that little bit better. And I know we're talking percentages here, but there's so much that I can't control on a movie set. I can't control when we're exterior what the natural wind is going to be. I can't control the distant aeroplane. I can't control the very slight traffic noise from the road. There's so much that we can't control as production sound mixers. If I can just control as much as I can, and that includes getting that signal into the digital domain as early as possible, and what that could potentially mean. And, you know, let's just talk hypothetically. It may mean that you guys in post, that Nancy Nugent title, when she gets that vocal and she wants to clean it up and remove some of those elements that I've just discussed, has a slightly more robust signal to do it with because it was digital all the way through the chain. And we're talking small percentages, tiny percentages, but if it's available, I want it. And Wicked is the first movie where I can honestly say we were in the digital domain on the booms all the way through.
I think that since we are talking about musical, we didn't touch one thing yet, and it is the PA system that you used.
Yeah.
And how did you use it? When did you play back? When did you use the thumper track? And what was the workflow in this domain?
Speakers versus earwigs and
subwoofers.
Yeah.
Again, the use of the PA and the thumper track on Wicked was very much a unique part of our pot of ingredients that we had standing by that we used in different ways on different tracks. Let me give you one of the scenarios. I've spoken a lot about the choreography on Wicked. That involves, in Shiz University, people dancing with chairs and spinning the chairs around and you know, lots of footfall and stuff like that. Now, what I would do was obviously on the wide shots, I've got to let that go. And it's tough. But then when we start moving in a little bit closer, I'm starting to say to Jack, the first AD, through Arthur, the first AS, Jack, we're only seeing that corner of the room. Can those other three corners of the room not do it this time? Can they not be doing the dance movement because we're not seeing them on the camera? Can they not be spinning the chairs around? And so as we get tighter and tighter and tighter, I'm removing the environmental effects of the action as much as possible so that we get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. Now, what I'm very aware of when I'm doing that is that part of this life within this scene, part of this live performance isn't just the vocal. The vocal is obviously the kernel of the live performance. But if you like, way down the chain, we've got other elements that we're going to see on screen that we need to hear. But it could very well be that although we want to hear them, we don't want to hear them as loud as they would be in reality. We want them to punctuate the music and support the vocal, not crush the vocal and be louder than the music. And so to give John Marquis and Nancy Nugent-Title, the supervising sound editors, the ability to blend, rebuild, and use those sound effects as a checkerboard to support the score and the live vocals rather than something that they're fighting against in the final mix. What we did was, as I was reducing all of these background effects, I would go to John Chu and Jack Ravenscourt at the end of the scene and I would say, guys, look, and rather than doing a room tone, which of course is what we used to do on a normal film back in the day, I would say, can I do an effects pass? Mm-hmm. And what that effects pass would be the vocalist not singing, obviously. It would be the choreography in its entirety, recorded in stereo on the booms, where I say, guys, I know that I've been asking you to be as quiet as possible. I know I've relaxed you guys who weren't in frame. Can you all come back in now? And Chris Scott, the choreographer's there supporting me, saying, guys, come back in. Simon wants to talk to you. And I'd say, can we just do a pass here? But guys, I'm going to play this back, not only in your earwigs, but I know that when you start crashing these desks or spinning these chairs, it sometimes gets so loud that you can't hear the earwigs because they're limited in what we can do. What we're going to do is we're going to play the rhythm of the bass line alongside the earwig production backing track, and we're going to hit you with a thumper, and that thumper is going to go wah, 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 wah. And of course, afterwards, John Marquis and Nancy Nugent-Title will remove that because it's at 45 hertz. Mm-hmm. But what I will get for them is a fantastic, real, on the set, in the right acoustic, to the correct rhythm, the exact background noise that we see in all of the wide shots. So that then, when we're into the live vocalists, whether it be Johnny Bailey, Jeff Goldblum, or Ari or Cynthia, when we see them in close-up, we can have all of that beautiful on-set noise, mm-hmm. but at an appropriate level that supports the rest of the soundtrack, which John and Andy Nelson at the re-recording desk will shape into the Dolby Atmos track. And that's really important. And by the way, I'm not saying that John and Nancy won't go and recreate elements with a loop group, with Foley, mm-hmm. with synthetic noises that they have designed. But that again becomes part of this toolbox, this beautiful checkerboard of sound.
It's extra valuable to have this SFX track from the set with the acoustics and with everything.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm not saying that one way is better than the other. I'm saying let's have everything mm-hmm. in our toolbox so that we can then creatively, or John and Nancy and Andy and Jack Dolman, the supervising music editor, with John Chu sitting there, can create this soundtrack that is wicked. Mm-hmm. That's what we did with the subwoofers. There were times like on No One Mourns the Wicked, where actually with No One Mourns the Wicked, we were at the get-go, we weren't intending to do that live because it's not solo. I think we had something like 160 background actors on the set, and No One Mourns the Wicked becomes quite an aggressive chant. We knew that a lot of the background actors weren't singers. Some of them were, but the majority weren't. But of course, we've got the fantastic Ben Holder, who's got them in a tent before the night shoots, and he's rehearsing them. And he's listening to groups of 12 singing it. And what he's doing is he's taking notes. He finds the best 75 singers. Because remember, I've got 75 earwigs. So out of the 160, he now knows who we're going to give the earwigs to if we go live. And then what we know we're going to do is we're going to have those 75 who can sing and do understand rhythm. They will be, if you like, the leading vocalists in the chant. We will support the rest of the guys who are learning the song with Ben in the big tent before we start shooting. We will support them with the subwoofers. And on that particular scene, we had 36 kilowatts of subwoofers. Okay. Now, guys, I don't know how much you know about raving, but this is bigger than an exterior. Yeah. This is as big as an outside rave gets. We're talking about a Pink Floyd level sound system, 36 kilowatts of subwoofers, and we've surrounded, Taz and the Third ASs have surrounded this set with an array. And so when we start shooting to lip sync on the rehearsal. We do the rehearsals with the music, with the backing track playing out. But Ben Holder's got and it's the best way of doing it, Ben Holder's got everyone singing anyway, despite the fact I'm not going to get a clean recording, because then when those cameras are zooming in on long lenses, what John gets out of it, if they're really singing, he sees the muscles in their neck and the emotion far more than if they're lip syncing. So we start the singing over the top of the backing track, and John goes to Arthur and says, can we do this live? Because there's something about these guys all singing. And what I think we fell in love with, what I certainly fell in love with, was the fact that 50% of them weren't singers. And No One Mourns the Wicked is almost like a football chant, or for US viewers, a soccer chant. It's like the way that people sing in stadiums. It's not singing, it's talk speaking. It's a chant. And it actually sounded quite aggressive and a little bit frightening. There was an element there that was just like, it was a bit like, ooh, there's chills here. Like, that is a big group of people and they sound angry. And so we actually went live for quite a few of those takes. We didn't do everything live on that big chant, but we got enough so that there was live elements for John and Nancy and Andy to blend that into the studio chorus pre-record and basically create something that supported the visual images. And that, again, is part of what we did on Wicked. We didn't just choose one methodology that went through the whole of Wicked. We looked at every single scene, every single music track, every single song, whether it was a solo, whether it was a chorus, how many backing dancers we had, whether they were slamming desks and tables, spinning chairs, whether it was like a football chant of football hooligans. And we basically chose the best workflow to cover that. And actually, on No One Mourns the Wicked, with 36 kilowatts of sub bass, doing a 45 hertz, with 75 of the best singers with earwigs who could lead the chant, and then everyone else who had probably never sung before in their life, bringing almost, remember, they're angry villagers, so they didn't sound like a professional chorus, polished. What they sounded like was angry villagers. And that is about supplying choices and elements supported through technology and experience, and giving those choices to John Chu. That's what I do.
I'm just curious, with that amount of output power, didn't you have the problem with some props rattling around or something like that?
Of course, but we also knew that this is a noisy moment, and we've also got 160 people singing at the top of their voices. We also know that we've got an incredibly intricate, full range, Greg Wells produced music track that's going to be in there as well. So actually, although often with a thumper track, I'm turning it down, I'm tuning it down because I don't want to hear the set rattle at all. This was one of those moments where we kind of had a bit of freedom and we could rock the set.
Beautiful. I think this Wicked step further even for you in your career. And I just want to ask, are there some stories or some scenes that you will remember?
Every scene on Wicked, but before I go into a specific, let me just say that there were many times, and I'm going to sound slightly mushy now, but you're going to have to bear with me. I think we already spoke about time, we spoke yesterday in a workshop about me sitting, recording I Dreamed a Dream with Anne Hathaway on Les Miserables, and there were tears rolling down my cheeks. That happened a number of times on Wicked when I was recording Cynthia and Ari duetting as Elphaba and Galinda. It happened a few times where I found tears rolling down my cheeks in the emotional moments. And that, when I get that little shiver and I find my eyes getting wet and I'm just watching some 7-inch monitors in front of me and I've got my faders, that's when I kind of know that there's something special going on. It's when suddenly I'm feeling like I'm in a cinema. I'm not a production sound mixer on a movie set. And I do this for a living. I spend most of my life on a movie set. These times are few and far between, and it happened a lot on Wicked. But if I'm to talk about one specific scene that kind of challenged us in a way that we hadn't experienced before, let's talk about capturing live singing on someone that's flying through the air on wires with a huge amount of wind on them.
Okay.
So, Defying Gravity, Cynthia Erivo's piece as she's flying on her broomstick. In the build-up to Wicked, I had lots of different conversations with different departments about the live singing. And one of the things that kept on being brought up, not in an obstructive way, but in an inquisitive way, was, well, how are you going to deal with Cynthia when she's flying on Defying Gravity? We're going to have to do that to playback, aren't we? It wasn't one department or the other that brought that up with me. It was most departments at some point before we got to that scene said to me, well, how are you going to deal with that? And it was almost kind of like let's all face it. That's going to be done to lip sync, isn't it? And my point was throughout this, look, what we've got to do is we know that John Chu wants to go live. We already know, having had Cynthia on the set now and hearing what she can do, that she's going to insist on going live. So let's not start making decisions at any point now. What we should all be doing as a collaborative team is not thinking to ourselves, it's on wires, it's got big wind, the wires are going to be noisy. Let's just accept that this is going to be lip sync. I said, guys have got to be prepared. I think what's going to happen, I'm going to have the playback tracks available in case John and Cynthia say, we think we should go lip sync on this. But we should all assume that when they get to the set, it's going to go like this. We want to go live. And so what I had firstly was incredible support from the special effects department, who had built 5 different levels for the whole of Wicked of silent wind. The special effects supervisor, Paul Corbold, had just, I've worked with Paul a number of times, but he'd really just gone one step further with silent wind. He had 5 different levels. He had big, not quite so big, medium, small, and tiny. And he applied those different silent wind systems depending on what the scene was and what the requirement was. Can you see there's a common theme here? Yeah. In that it wasn't just me doing this, it was all of my colleagues in all departments. Why did he supply this silent wind? To support the live process. So when we talk about collaboration and me saying everyone was on the same page here, there's another department there, 5 different sizes of silent wind, where the squirrel fan that supplies the wind is either completely outside the studio on the 2 big versions. The smaller versions, which have different diameter tubes, have different sizes of squirrel fan, but they're boxed in soundproof boxes on caster wheels. So although they're not outside the sound studio, they're outside the set itself and the wind is piped in on flexible plastic hose. So the special effects department, kindly had all of their silent wind available on that scene for Cynthia. The stunt department, who had Cynthia doing extremely dynamic stunt work, and I'm talking about acrobatic levels of stunts on wires, the sort of stuff that I've only seen stunt performers be able to achieve. I haven't told you this, but Cynthia's an athlete, okay? She's like running 5Ks every morning before she even starts her workout, and not at jogging speed. She's running it, okay? You can find online footage of her, and she's putting in decent times on a treadmill before she even does her morning workout, okay? She's an athlete. And so she had rehearsed again and again all of these fantastically dynamic swoops, somersaults, flying upside down. And this was one of the reasons why people were saying, well, surely we're not going to do this live, because they knew what Cynthia was going to have to do acrobatically. Those wires are normally noisy. Normally you have all sorts of pulley systems that are being governed by electronics on the set. The stunt department had done absolutely everything that they could. Thank you, Joe McLaren, the stunt designer, for supporting us in that. These wire rigs, they weren't silent, but they were as quiet as they could possibly be. Anything that could be off the set was off the set. And you guys know that that's not always the case. Normally it's kind of like, well, this is stunts.
Yeah.
This is stunts. It's the way it's going to have to be. They'd also joined in, making this incredible effort to support our actors. So it was as quiet as it could be, and we had silent wind ready, but we also had huge 12-volt fans ready. Because, of course, that's going to be easiest for the special effects department. If Cynthia comes in and says, listen, do you know what? I would just want to concentrate on the acrobatic element and we can just do this to lip sync. We would have been there to support her. The big fans would have gone on. There would have been no problem with that. But of course, we put Cynthia up on the wires and there wasn't a big inquiry about this. John just said, hey, Cynthia, are you going live on this? And Cynthia kind of looked at John and said, of course I am. And I kind of looked round, and the grips that had made the track very quiet for me, I'd asked them to relay the track because it was creaking. The stunt guys who'd done some extra work on the cables. The special effects guys, suddenly they're walking over to their silent wind tubes. And there was just this kind of acknowledgement of, well done, Simon. Thanks for giving us the heads up, because what you said was going to happen has absolutely happened. Mm. And Cynthia started singing live. And it just had something that you don't find in a pre-record when you've got an actor flying through the air and doing somersaults. Her vocal was perfect. It was, from a performance point of view, it was studio quality. She's always in tune. That's a given, right? But it was just on. It was 100% on point. It didn't sound like something was missing because she was having to do it as she was doing somersaults. Mm. But what it did have was an effort in her voice, and if you like, an immediacy and an urgency, which also, without affecting the vocals in a negative way, told the story that she's flying. It sounded like she was flying as she was singing, and I'll tell you why. Because she was flying as she was singing. There's something there. There's something granular that you can't make afterwards. And that's what we got with Cynthia singing live on Defying Gravity. And let's just quickly talk, because I'm sure people are going to ask how we did it. From a miking perspective, Cynthia had a DP8 4061 in her brim of her hat. Now, the way that her brim of her hat sits is very similar to mine. It's a centimetre above the eyebrows. So it's about as perfect as it can be in terms of a position for a lav. When you put a lav there, dare I say it, it sounds like a boom, if it's a DPA lav, right? It doesn't have any chest resonance that sometimes we get from a body placed lav, which is fine. I'm not complaining about that. But again, there's a nuance there when we have a lav here that is just on point and will match a studio vocal. It will sound even more like a studio produced vocal. And the other thing is, it doesn't matter where the head goes, the lav goes with. So there isn't an element of someone turning on and off a lav. So it was just a beautiful thing. Yeah. But we also had Arthur on a Super C-Mitt. We were doing the background on a blue screen on that specific setup. Because she's flying through the sky, there wasn't a set, so we were blue screen. So Arthur had a blue sleeve on his boom. He had a blue wind gag made specifically, custom made for us by Bubble Bee Industries. We were using a Super C-Mitt so that we could supply processed and unprocessed through that boom. Arthur had, on that occasion, I try and go cables on every boom, as I'm sure many of your listeners know. But on that occasion, because I wanted to give Arthur absolute freedom, because remember, he's following someone that's flying through the air on wires. So he's got to avoid wires. He's got to make sure at all costs, don't hit Cynthia, right? I'm not going to tie him up by putting him on a cable. So he was using a Zaxcom 743 transmitter, which is the only transmitter in the world that can transmit 2 legs of a Super C-Mitt, both the processed and the unprocessed. So that's what we were using for the boom acquisition. If I'm to be specific about what I think that the DPA sounded fantastic for 100% of that vocal performance. The boom sounded as good as the DPA, despite the fact that it could only get as close as the tip of the witch's hat. So it wasn't like in a close-up at 3 or 4 inches. It was more like 12, 14 inches. But I would say that it sounded as good as the DPA and was completely usable on 60% of it. Because, of course, when Cynthia starts doing somersaults and flying upside down, but when she flies to camera and we're like that and she's singing, then the boom was absolutely wonderful. And again, I'm not there to make a decision about what's going to be best in a situation like that, because I'm judging through headphones. I'm judging a cappella. I'm judging based on what I'm seeing and hearing on a film set. The people that really need to make that judgment are Andy Nelson, John Chu, John Marquis and Nancy Nugent-Title, and Jack Dolman, the supervising music editor, in the final mix. And what I want to do is give them choices. I don't want to ever lock them into anything. Hey guys, I've got 32 tracks. Surely what I should be doing is giving as many choices to that supervising sound team as possible. And that way I'm fulfilling my role as a production sound mixer on a live movie musical.
I have this feeling that the whole story of Wicked and the message that you are telling us is like, it's all about the collaboration. That if you really want to preserve the performance and the acting, it's like you really need to be on the same level and on the same page with everyone, and there needs to be this teamwork.
For it sounded like a family or a team that wants to make the best thing together.
Yeah,
it was
with
not
one
like
goal.
Not like department. It was just one movie family doing the best they could do.
It's teamwork, guys.
Yeah.
And where that starts is at the top. It starts with producer Mark Platt, who's the mastermind behind Wicked. It starts with director John Chu, who is the visual genius, the capturer of emotions. And it starts with them saying, our version of Wicked in the cinema is going to be live sung. And the message that I've got for directors, for young up-and-coming directors, is if you support your sound department in front of the rest of the departments around you, there's going to be a respect. And what you're going to get, and not just talking about live sung musicals, I'm talking about dialogue on films and storytelling. Let's stop seeing sound as a technical entity. Let's start seeing sound as exactly what you're trying to do when you're telling your story. Let's see sound as performance and performance as sound. Because guys, there is no difference. The sound is the performance, and the performance is the lifeblood of the story that we're trying to tell.
Wonderful message.
Yeah. I will just wrap it up. Simon, thank you for everything. And I think I will speak for the whole sound community around the world. You are bringing the game bigger and bigger, and you are the most valuable source for us because you are sharing all of your work on your social media. You are writing the articles. They are so huge and so informative for us that I think a lot of people will agree with me that you are helping building our career around the world. So we are very thankful to have you here. And it was a huge pleasure to have you also on the workshop and at our podcast. Thank you for everything, Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Simon, so much.
Viktor, Miro, my message to you guys is I'm here for a reason. You guys have really impressed me. What you're doing over here in Slovakia is deeply inspiring. Okay, when I looked at what you guys were achieving, I kind of saw people they're my people. Even though we'd never met, you guys you're my people, okay? This is the kind of community and open-mindedness that we should be celebrating. And what I want to say about me sharing everything on social media, doing these podcasts is, what I'm trying to do is elevate sound and elevate this idea that we are filmmakers amongst our brothers and sisters who are also filmmakers. We're not these guys that sit in the back of the set complaining that we need another take. We have to start treating each other as colleagues and elevating our craft, because at the end of the day, sound is 50% of the movie.
Perfect. What more we can say?
Best last words.
Yeah. I will just say thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and tune into our social media, tune into Simon Hayes Sound. I think it's the most valuable source of information about sound, about filmmaking process, and also tune to our Instagram Beyond the Sound and also our YouTube channel. And I hope we will bring more interesting guests in the future. So thank you guys for supporting us, and see you soon in the next episode.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Simon,
Thank you.
Bye.